The following program is produced by Pacific Vista Productions.
Welcome to City Arts of San Francisco, a remarkable gathering of writers and performing artists in a series of talks and on-stage conversations celebrating the life of the mind. I am your host, Maya Angelou. Our guest is Peggy Noonan, the highly regarded political speechwriter and journalist, known as the Poet Laureate of resurgent republicanism. She is the creator of the phrases, "a kinder, gentler nation," and "read my lips." Peggy Noonan is also the author of the bestseller, What I Saw at the Revolution, a memoir of her political and personal experiences in Washington during the Reagan and Bush years. Her second book, Boomer Born, was published in the spring of 1994. Peggy Noonan began her career in Washington, D.C., when she joined Ronald Reagan's speechwriting team in 1984. She made political history in January 1989 by drafting both the outgoing president's farewell speech and the incoming president's inaugural address. As a former writer of radio pieces for the liberal commentator Dan Rather at CBS News, Peggy Noonan experienced a radical conversion from left-wing activism in the early 80s. Here is Peggy Noonan discussing her political ideals with writer and international affairs expert Orville Schell.
Well, welcome, Peggy. In reading your books, I'm sort of astounded and amazed at how two human beings can have such completely different fixes on things, or two really political sections of society. I think it's very easy for conservatives to demonize liberals and liberals to demonize conservatives. And I read your book with great interest because you were very likable in it, in both of them.
Oh, good. Good.
And I think this is a great accomplishment. And I
Thank you.
At the outset, would like to congratulate you. Now, let's get down to the hard
Thank
stuff.
you very much. I just wanted to be confusing. I thought, why not be a likable right-wing nut?
Right. A nut. Well, we'll get to that. You say that President Reagan moved you. You say that you adored him, that you, in fact, loved him. And as an infidel, I wanted to know more.
About Reagan. I think Reagan is a fascinating character. It was wonderful and confusing to work for him. Wonderful because as a personality, he was a marvelously easygoing and humorous person. Professionally, if you are working with him as a writer, it was not a mystery to discern his political impulses and his political views. His views were well known and had not changed in roughly 25 years. He had, of course, had a great transit. He had started out as a liberal Democrat when he was a young guy in Hollywood. He always used to like to remind us that he had campaigned for Harry Truman in 1948. So he had something of an intellectual transit in the area of politics in his life. But certainly by the time I knew him, he was a president. He'd been president for 3 years by the time I met him. His views were very clear and obvious. Among other things, that made things delightfully easy for those who wrote for him, unlike those who wrote, for speechwriters for, most of these speechwriters for modern presidents know each other, and we belong to an organization together, the Judson Welliver Society, which is the society of a society named after the first presidential speechwriter who was hired by Calvin Coolidge. We all know each other. We all compare notes. And the Carter people had it terribly hard to be a speechwriter for Carter. The Clinton people find it hard to write for him. They are not sure of any of his views on various issues, but gee, it was easy for Reagan, We were just lucky. But I really do like him. I love to think of him. Somebody had a report, the New York Times carried a report the other day, that Reagan is at home in Bel Air, California, teaching himself to play the harmonica.
Yeah, it fits. Even I see the symmetry.
He is, now try this one. He is at home teaching himself to play Red River Valley. I just love it. It's like, it made me think of the soundtrack to old John Ford movies. I could see Reagan on the couch sort of doing that.
With a bandana around his neck and a...
Yeah. It seems an appropriate thing to do in one's old age.
But, you know, yes, the harmonica. Well, I'll have to take that one under submission from my golden years, but...
It seems so peaceful.
What confuses me a little, I mean, I really appreciate your warmth for him, which clearly comes through as very genuine. And yet, you know, as you depict him, and we use one expression. You said that you described him as having a face at one point in your first book, like that of the look of old men at nursing homes when someone unexpectedly walks in the front door. Now, this is not exactly flattering, and you describe him as he will not reflect. So many politicians resist introspection.
Yes. That is my experience with all of them, Democrats and Republicans, high and low. They are not oh, thank you. That was a Republican. That was the Republican in the audience. They are not a reflective breed, politicians. They are activists. They get up in the morning like hungry for action. They do stuff. They make decisions. They make a decision on the bill. They advance the bill. They talk to the television camera. It seems to me there's something compulsive in just about all of them, and that they need a lot of movement, literally physical movement, but also forward movement, perhaps illusory, but perhaps real forward movement in their lives, to keep from thinking and reflecting.
But it seems to me maybe Reagan, it was not this quest for forward movement that kept him somewhat somnambulant. But
I think somnambulant may be too strong a word.
Too strong?
I should put the old person in the old person's home, getting a look on his face of lovely expectation when someone unexpected walks in the door on visiting day. That was, the context of that was Reagan in the Oval Office when somebody said something that he found interesting. When real life intruded in any given meeting. Meetings are usually boring, and people talk about really abstract geopolitical things. Now and then somebody would say something real, and Reagan would look up like so gratefully and almost with his eyes say, "Thank you. Real life has intruded on this meeting." And then fleetingly, whoever said something real would back off.
Well, did you find his lack of sort of unalloyed ambition endearing somehow? I mean, in a
yes,
sense that it was not...
Yeah. I was kind of charmed by his lack of personal ambition. Reagan, somebody asked me recently about the quality of his mind, you know? Was it a first-rate mind? Was it a second-rate mind? And I had a number of thoughts. One is that I often think, when I think of Reagan, I think of something that Oliver Wendell Holmes, said of Franklin Roosevelt. He said that Roosevelt had a second-rate mind, but a first-rate temperament. And many people who knew FDR thought, you know what, that's a pretty good summation of this fellow. When I think of that, I think of Reagan also. He was not an intellectual. He was brighter than your average bear. I mean, obviously, but he was not an intellectual. But you know what? I think, you reach a certain age in life, and you can start to think that intellect is overrated as a quality, particularly, believe it or not, in presidents. We have had so many high IQ types get us in such trouble. Then you get a guy who comes in, he's got a certain amount of common sense, he's got a good character, he makes good moral judgments, and he does the right things. So I think not only in politics, but actually in real life, intelligence is overrated as a virtue. I mean, very high intelligence. There's a person hissing there. It's probably a very intelligent person. I don't mean to offend you.
I mean, this strikes me as a somewhat Taoist view of politics.
A what view? I'm sorry.
A Taoist, a sort of a passive view, that by not doing something, everything happens. That those who are aggressive and assertive can often create a counter-reaction that's counterproductive.
Maybe. A lot of movement is just bustle.
Well, apropos, you said a wonderful thing. I really scratched my head over this, flying over about Kansas City. You said that Reagan is proof that the unexamined life was worth living. Would you care to elaborate?
No, I wouldn't. I really have. I have absolutely nothing to add to that, Orville.
Yeah. Let me read one other thing. I mean, your writing is so wonderful, and your images are so evocative. You describe our lovely Sunshine State, and we're not the Sunshine State, we're the Golden State.
That's right.
As like, this is apropos, I think, of President Reagan's sort of milieu, as like moving through a lovely haze of warm gelatin. Reality offers no resistance.
I know California only as a visitor. I have been here for work reasons, maybe in all 20 days in the past decade. But it's so soft here. When you live here, you probably forget to notice, as we all do, forget to notice what is literally around us every day. But the wind and the air are so soft here in Los Angeles also. These are the only two towns I ever come to, really, San Diego a little. But it's a physically soft and moist place, California. And it has this funny flat white light. Los Angeles does, at least. There's an actress named Kate Nelligan who described to a friend of mine who is an entertainment reporter. She's in a bad mood, and she spoke of the flat white light that makes me suicidal when she visits Los Angeles. And she meant it as a mordant comment. She wasn't totally serious, but there's something to that, the flatness of the light out there. But yeah, this is an interesting place, California.
Do you think that Reagan sort of defied categories? I mean, people love to pigeonhole every politician.
Yeah, Reagan was big. I think he was one of the three great presidents of this century. I think this century will...
Gasp.
That hissing man has now made a snoring sound, which is making me nervous. Yeah, I think he is one of the three great presidents of this century. I think it kind of comes down to two Roosevelts and a Reagan, for reasons that you're all familiar with and I won't bore you with.
No, please bore us.
Gee, when in your time you have effectively defeated communism and banished it from the earth, and... Thank you. And banished it almost from the earth. When you did this through taking the right actions and speaking in the right way and being very vigorous in your views, he made some very shrewd choices, some very shrewd defense choices, which helped those folks, which helped that bad system collapse. Any guy of whom you can say he turned the economy around in an explosion of economic growth and defeated communism. If you can say those two things of a president, then you are saying this is a really big guy. And big guys always are sui generis, are always of themselves alone.
I think
he's laughing now.
The groan, well, the collective he. I think the groans and the gasps are exactly what I was suggesting at the beginning, that it is amazing that we can have intelligent people who have such absolutely different views of this man and this period.
It is horrible.
And I urge you all to read her book, because I can't get into it now. It's too big a subject, but it does sort of soften this great divide. I mean, you do have a kind of a sense of something that doesn't naturally occur to us, I think, as we have our categories for liberals and conservatives. I think in this sense, if I may say, you bridge the gap in a kind of very interesting and nice way. Now, I want to move on.
Oh, good.
I have down here speech writing, which really did intrigue me. You having done your time there. How many years were you?
Not long, 2.5 years for President Reagan, and then a year when George Bush was running for president the first time, 1988.
You say that you ached to write the president's words, and yet you didn't meet him. for 4 months after you got there. And I mean, this, for me, and I want to ask you more about writing in a minute, it just raised the question of, is speech writing, it's a very strange kind of writing.
Yes, it is, and it has changed a great deal, really, since JFK's day. Speechwriters used to be people who were working every day with the president and who had been putting speeches together with him for a long time, and they were just there. Ted Sorensen was not only John Kennedy's most significant speechwriter, he was John Kennedy's chief of staff. They were used to working together very closely. Starting just about the LBJ days and the Nixon days, speechwriting became a separate little office off literally outside the White House, next door to the White House in the old executive office building. It's always a dozen speechwriters and maybe 3 researchers, and they are lucky to get in to see their president. They'll talk to him on the phone, but they are lucky to get in and see their president more than 3-4 times a year. A Jimmy Carter speechwriter told me, it was quite poignant. I was talking about, I was brand new in the White House, I'd been there about 2 months. I met this guy, Jimmy Carter speechwriter, and I said, I haven't met the president yet. And he got dreamy and he said, I had a long conversation with Carter once. And I said, when was that? And he said, well, it was the day I quit. I got to say goodbye. And I thought, oh boy, this is very strange. I thought it's going to be strange, and it was. And it is still this way and should not be.
I mean, even if they were closer to the president, I just wonder about the whole notion of one person writing for another, because in effect, what that means they're doing is also thinking for the president. And I think you and I and any writer knows that one of the things writing does is it forces you to engage in the discipline of thinking and thinking clearly to come to a conclusion. And I wonder how you felt as a speechwriter in effect playing this surrogate role, ostensibly of writer, but actually also in certain respects of thinker.
Sure, writers are thinking for presidents, and if you're lucky, they will like the thinking you did for them. And if you're not, they will cut it out. They will change the speech very seriously. Reagan was great. Reagan never said, I don't like this, or this doesn't reflect my views. Reagan would kill 12 lines of important argument, and then write a little note that said something like, the speech seemed a little long. He hated to let you know he just didn't like what you'd done. But sure, are they thinking for the president? Yes. Is there an inevitability to it? Yes. Presidents speak about 6 times a day. We see them every night on the news, and maybe they're doing a little news conference selling the health care plan out in Omaha. And maybe there's a bite of a speech that they gave to the Knights of Columbus convention in Washington. But in fact, presidents are speaking to various groups within the White House and the old executive office building about 4, 5, 6 times a day. And they can either do their jobs as president or write all their own speeches. So they do need someone to write the speeches for them. And that's all honorable and fine. The bad part comes when the speechwriting process becomes a shop that is detached, in fact, from the president, and you have to be guessing what he thinks, how he feels, and how he wants to approach something, as opposed to walking out of the room after listening to him for 2 hours and knowing, as Ted Sorensen did.
I mean, I often had the feeling, particularly with President Bush, that there was a basically intelligent man who, because of high office and the demands of office, had lost the custom of thinking clearly. And when he got away from the speeches that you or others might write, he just descended into a kind of a babble. And I wondered if, in your view, you found him a coherent thinker when you were alone speaking, or whether this process, it's like the metaphor that came to mind was a parent who keeps cleaning up a child's room. The child never learns to clean it up himself.
Good. Well, I'm going to ignore that part. Bush had a clear and sharp mind, and sometimes an angry mind. He could really snap things out, both observations and the rationales behind certain decisions. Bush was a smart guy. I do not happen to think that in the presidency, because maybe one has struggled so hard to get there, that one's mind becomes a little soft and one's thoughts become confused. I do not think that's true, but I do have this feeling that there's a certain paradox in the presidential temperament, and it is this. The big thing, the big essential thing you need in order to become president or a big political leader is a huge, strong, maybe needy, maybe demanding ego. You know, you have to wake up in the morning and think, you know, we have 250 million people here in our country, and I'm the one who should be president. You need a pretty strong ego to have those thoughts. You need a pretty strong ego to suffer through everything you have to suffer through in the decade before you get the presidency, when you know you want it. You may not have told anybody, but you're going for it. And you're going to fundraisers and being treated shabbily, and you're going to columnists and looking for support, and they're insulting you and calling you a lapdog. You get beat up a lot on the way up, and then you get in there, and you do it because you have this huge and strong ego. But then, the minute you are in the White House, you stop seeing things clearly because your ego, the thing that put you in the Oval Office, is blocking the way of your vision. Your ego gets in the way of your ability to see things. Your ego gives you illusions. Presidents are too loved. They're too surrounded by people saying, I loved what you said the other night, Mr. President. It was so wonderful. I saw you on TV. You were so great. I saw you throwing out the first ball at the ball game. You threw it so well. It's not healthy. It's one of the things Reagan detached from. Reagan didn't think it was healthy either.
You in your new book, I think it was, referred to politics as involving big weirdness.
Yeah, that's right.
It sounds to me like, upon reflection, you feel it's a rather unhealthy life for the people in it, and probably that they don't deport themselves to the advantage of the country, given the climate they have to struggle in and be elected in.
They get twisted up a lot, people in politics. I have a friend, my closest friend in politics is a guy who's a U.S. Senator, and he is up for re-election this year. And he loves going back to, he works 4 days a week in Washington, then he's 3 days a week home. He loves being at home. He loves meeting with all the local organizations and the local folks. He loves traveling through his state, which is diverse, ideologically interesting, physically interesting, ethnically diverse. It's a great place. He loves going home, seeing the people, but no matter what he does, wherever he is, he feels he is tortured by the press. From factual mistakes in the press reporting what he said in the speech, to the local columnist who has an edge and who wants to take on this big U.S. senator. He feels lashed. He feels actually the lash of the press. I think they all do. And they all feel the lash of fundraising. It's a twisted life. It's weird. It's weird.
Did you feel, I mean, you know, from a certain perspective, speech writing, which is obviously inevitable, I mean, it's almost, it seems to me, a form of plagiarism. I mean,
what is it that you're plagiarizing?
Well, you're plagiarizing
someone else's thoughts?
You're plagiarizing your speechwriter. I mean, it's like taking somebody's term paper and handing it in. I mean, this thought occurs to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, let it go. I don't want you to...
All right. Let it go. If I can find it here, there's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Let me just read you something here. I ran across this, too, in the airplane coming back from New York today. Can the man behind the speeches of 3 U.S. presidents make you a more powerful speaker? This is the headline. The secrets of leaders who regularly speak before audiences. I thought of you immediately when I read this. Suppose for a moment that every time you had to give a speech, you could create and deliver a powerful, eloquent presentation. And it goes on. There is a way to achieve that goal. And then it has a picture, as you will see. In the Oval Office, President Reagan congratulates Aram Bakshian Jr. for his outstanding service as White House Director of Speechwriting. And you dial an 800 number here and say, yes, send me the American Speaker No-Risk 30-day trial. 2 extraordinarily useful sections will supply the ideal hook for your every talk, every time, on and on. And I'm wondering, what do you make of this? And who is this guy?
What do I make of it?
Is this good?
Is it good? No. I believe it is unspeakably vulgar. And you know what? You know, no guy who says, I'll do your speech, I'll give you the right hook, I'll give you the right joke. you'll never get anything good this way. You know, this is not the way literature is done. This is the way words are processed, however, but it's not the way literature gets done. This was a fellow who was there before my time. It was not a guy that I knew. But I think this is embarrassing. Where'd you find this?
This was in the United Airlines in-flight magazine. I do my research in the most arcane places possible.
You can also get a free bonus 100 best quotes for 1994.
Right. No, it's wonderful.
I just think it's vulgar.
Yeah. Well,
can you imagine Ted Sorensen doing that?
No, I can't, frankly.
Because he was a serious grown-up.
Something happened. Well, I'm wondering too. Obviously, you enjoy writing and take it very seriously, and you speak of a kind of a liberation you felt when you finally decided you weren't going to write speeches, and you wanted to do your own writing. And in fact, it's interesting. I notice in your two books. I mean, your first book is very interesting, but it's much more, may I say, a little less outspoken and courageous is your next book, which is really you just kick jams out and you let her rip. And I wonder...
Do you mean that the first one or the second one?
The first one. It's
okay.
Much more... I
Kick
felt
the jams out?
constrained.
Or?
No.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
And I wondered if getting away from speech writing was something that made you really feel good, or did you miss it? Would you like to go back? Could you do it again?
Well, I miss it and don't miss it and would love to go back and will never go back. It's a wonderful job for the young. Do you know what I mean? You should always... great speechwriters. Ted Sorensen was about 33 when he was in the business. Most of them are young. They're in their 30s, and they get excited. They actually can get excited and teary-eyed about marvelous things like democracy and marvelous things like winning an election. But you should do it when you are still very young. I think it was Arthur Schlesinger said no one should do it after 40, and I think he had a very good reason for it, although I forget what it was. But it was good. It was smart. But he said, after 40, just don't do it. And I think that's probably true. Also, the thing about speechwriters who take it seriously is you become attached to one person, to Bobby Kennedy, to LBJ, to Ronald Reagan. I was lucky not only to Reagan, but after him for a time, Bush. You don't get attached to just anyone. You have to. They have to be special. It's special. It's a little marriage for a while, and if you're serious about it, you can't just do it for anyone.
Did you feel that, in some sense, being a speechwriter brought you into the spin doctoring trade?
No, spin doctoring mostly had to do with daily. How do we deal with this today? We got that problem, They're making all these sounds about Neil Bush. They're bringing him up on charges before the SNL. You're going to speak before the Chamber of Commerce. You're going to see the reporters before then. What are you going to say about Neil? That's spin doctoring. Luckily, speechwriting is somewhat detached from that.
Because I know in one place, I think it's in your recent book, you said that one speechwriter, whose name I forget now, had gotten Bush off the Iran-Contra hook with a good speech.
Oh, that's right.
Parvin,
that was serious.
Yeah.
A marvelous writer named Landon Parvin. He and Bush... I don't remember all the specifics. It was 1986. The Ollie North story had just blown up. Iran-Contra was a news story. And the question was, what did Bush know? There was a lot of confusion. What did he know? When did he know it? And Bush and Landon worked on a very serious and significant speech about it. I forget what they said, but it was good.
Do you think Bush was truthful with the American public on Iran-Contra?
I have never known. But I'll tell you, my only insight on Iran-Contra is this. All of these guys, everybody in government in Washington, is at 12 meetings a day, 6 days a week. And I tend to believe people who say, I do not remember the meeting 3 years ago on should we send a tank to India. I would tend to take that seriously. But that is the only thing I would have to say about that, because I don't know. I never went to those meetings. Speechwriters usually aren't allowed to. It's like, we're doing the grown-up thing here. We're meeting on Iran-Contra, and later we'll meet with you, and we'll talk about our positions on things. Speechwriters are never in on those meetings.
Work out the speech for
But, because we are never in on those things, we have there's one thing you can say of speechwriters in Washington that you can say of no other public official in Washington, and that is not one of us has ever been indicted.
But, you know, on the other hand, Peggy, you say TV is such a liar. Now, this is hardly news, but it seems to me that really what you're talking about is a process which really from soup to nuts in politics is involved in some kind of, you know, all sorts of guile and subterfuge, and finally comes out over the television screen, and that in a certain sense speechwriting could be put under that rubric.
Sure, it can always be put to bad ends, and some bad people have had speechwriters. But still, it is essentially benign in that it is aimed at telling you what the position is, why it is this way, of giving you the arguments, you know? Mm-hmm. And can bad people make use of it? Sure.
You are listening to Republican speechwriter Peggy Noonan with Orville Schell on City Arts of San Francisco, made possible by a major grant from the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund. We will be back with the second half of our program in a moment.
If you would like to order an audio cassette of this program and receive a complete list of City Arts of San Francisco audio cassettes now available, the number to call is 1-800-41-RIVER. That's 1-800-41-RIVER.
You know, I don't know if you'd be willing. I'd love to have you read some things, short things. Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Now, I can help you out. I have some choices.
Oh.
Let me give you some suggestions. I mean, these are things that I happen to like. I loved your thing about New York parties. Oh. And there's a section on Marlon Fitzwater going bald. I choose these because the writing is really wonderful. Would you like to do the New York parties?
Sure. Just give it
do you want to use this copy? I've just put a slash mark here, and you can sort of go to you want to stop, but I have a suggested conclusion.
Thank you. I haven't seen this.
You
this
haven't?
This is a bound loose manuscript of my book,
yeah.
And it has this is the cover, and this picture was taken about last July, when oddly enough my hair was blonde. But it's become red in the past few months. We don't know how. And I don't know how I'm going to go. You know, Charlie Rose is going to hold this up and say, Peggy Noonan, and her brand new book, and the camera's going to go straight from this to me, and I'm going to look like Peggy's older sister. Maybe I'll say that. Maybe I'll say Peggy couldn't come tonight. I'm Barbara. Where did you mean here?
On the right-hand side, there's a star and a little bracket. It's sort of a possible starting point.
Oh, channel surfing.
Oh, is this channel surfing?
This is just a part of the book that is silly. It's about my life, and I talk about how I channel surf
apropos
at night.
Television is lies. Maybe it is a suitable place to begin.
I'm just sitting there, and I'm going click. I've been on this long, free associative journey. As I click along, I like to sit and channel surf at night, 2 o'clock in the morning if I can't sleep, and see things and daydream to them. And when the daydream's done, I go click again. So click and a wavelet, from Blair Brown's face to Florence Henderson's to Sally Fields flying over the sand-colored roofs of Southern California. Sister Bertrell, you like me. You really like me. The thing about surfing, you know one of the reasons people channel surf? Because it's the last immediate power they have. Jay Leno isn't amusing us this evening? Zap, you're gone, Jay. AMC dug a little too low in the old movie bin? Zap, take that, Cornell Wilde. Ted Koppel a bit smug tonight? Zap, try again tomorrow, Ted. You have power, autonomy, you are the king of zappers. You can cut Dick Gephardt off mid-sentence. Zap. It's where we insult our rulers now, at home on the couch with a cup of tea. Could I add that one night I had one of my greatest channel surfing nights about 3 years ago. I saw Roddy McDowell age before my eyes. And it was a great night. He was a child in How Green Was My Valley on Channel 5, and then he was in an old Heart to Heart rerun, and then he was a butler in Murder, She Wrote, and he just went from childhood to about 55. And it was a great night in my life.
The remote is power.
It's something.
That we can control.
I don't know what it is. It's funny how none of us know what to call it. We all use it, but we call it the remote, the zapper, the clicker. There should be like a national name for it. It's funny that that hasn't quite bubbled up yet.
Well, maybe, and you can add it to your galleys. Think up a good name.
Yeah.
Great contribution to America. I want to read another thing you wrote.
Thank you, Orville.
Peggy wrote a wonderful article in Esquire about Ed Rollins, and something apropos of television and various topics we've been covering. She says, here's the problem. When you have lived for 20 years in the land of spin and been a spin specialist and seen everyone spin and seen the world and its players spinning by as you sit and spin, you don't really know what's there anymore. It's not so much you don't know the facts anymore, but that you don't know you have any, that you don't know you anymore. Do you know many politicians that have survived this affliction?
I'm thinking mostly of political operatives, even more than politicians. But still, it's the whole spin culture is endemic to Washington life. Do I know? You know what's interesting to me? You can spin so much that you forget what the truth is. It used to be that you'd spin the truth. You'd take the truth and put a certain spin on it. Now I think people forget what the truth is or are uninterested in what the truth is. They just spin around like tops in that town. And it's dizzy-making. I think literally dizzy-making. For Ed and Sherry Rollins, of course it was, and that's in a way how Ed got in trouble. He started saying some dizzy things.
Did you find yourself at times getting dizzy?
No. You know what I found myself? I found myself sort of hydroplaning. You know how, particularly when you work in a campaign, you know how a car hydroplanes when it's raining out and you're going fast on the Autobahn, suddenly you're not, yeah, on the Autobahn of life, and suddenly the tires aren't really on the road anymore. You're really hydroplaning. That is how I experienced politics when I was in it. It's all fast forward, and it is disorienting in that way. It's not dizzy-making, but it's too quick. It's too pointlessly fast.
Did you think that you were, in effect, going to save your soul by leaving, or was that not a question? Or save at least your writer's soul? No,
I think boomer detachment saves your soul. I'm not sure leaving politics saves your soul. I don't know. You should go and do things and do them 100%, do them hard, do it right, but then you should leave, unless you mean to make your life there, and I did not.
I would love to still have you read the New York Parties, which is on page 57.
Oh, it is, is it?
I think
okay.
it did, unless I've got these reversed, check page 57. I think I marked it.
This is such a mess, this.
This is after Peggy left Washington to take up residence in New York, where a different kind of spinning goes on.
Oh, New York and its circles?
Yes.
Oh, so I was new in New York. I had just come back. It was 1989. I had just come back to New York from Washington, and I was rediscovering New York, but as an older person than when I left it. I'd worked at CBS in New York in my early 30s. Now I'm in my late 30s, and I just had a book come out, and I started being invited to things and seeing New York in a different way. New York and its circles. There's so much going on in New York in a business sense, in a social sense, in a business social sense, and so many kinds of relationships. Business friendships that turned into actual friendship, and those that are stuck in colleagueship. Small dinner parties among friends and colleagues, and larger ones among friends, colleagues, and people who hate each other. And there are the big parties at places like the Metropolitan Museum or the Four Seasons or the Public Library. These are interesting because I feel they are not so much parties as enactments. Everyone enacts whatever, a common mission, official approval of the person being honored, the celebration of something new, a book, a fashion line. I don't go to a lot of these things, but I go to some, and what surprises me is that I always see the same people there. They're all successful, big in their field. They are bold-face names. It's nice to see them, but I always wonder, are they always here? Is it a seamless social soiree that continues from night to night, that each evening changes its venue but not its cast? Are they out every night? And are they having fun? You want me to do the thing where my friend explains what it is?
Sure.
A friend of mine who has the kind of job that makes him part of the enactment life sat down and told me about what he calls the stations of the social cross. The Literary Lions dinner, the Committee to Protect Journalists dinner, the Penn dinner, the lavish book party for a well-known author. He told me, what you have to know about going to these parties is it's a substitute for life. You never have to be alone. You never have to have real experiences. The people who go to them wind up substituting the illusion of pleasure for pleasure. They derive a sense of themselves from what they're invited to. They want to be in Liz Smith or Susie in the list of those who attended. They want to be in a list read by plumbers, which is funny since they look down on plumbers. I thought that was a good summation of a lot of social life in New York. And it's true.
There was a time when at least being on the plumbers list was quite a distinguishing hallmark.
Oh, what a clever jape.
For all your humor, and I think your obvious enjoyment about being in politics and being around certain politicians, there is a kind of an air of disappointment throughout your work.
Well, yeah, life is disappointing in some ways, don't you think?
Well, yes.
You got all dressed up, you went to the party, and, it's just us.
I mean, I can see how you draw this conclusion. You say there are no places of excellence in truly superior people. Politicians, all disappointments.
Yeah. Yeah, that was from a little bit about the three stages you go through when you're in a place like the White House. You're an American. You're in your early 30s. You wind up walking the halls of a White House and you work there. And you think, this is the greatest place. And the first thing you think is, everybody here is really, really smart. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut so they don't find out that I'm not. And then you think you work there for a year and you're doing okay, and you've had a few things to say in the mess, and somebody liked your work, and you start to think, you know what, they're all pretty smart here, but I'm pretty smart too. And then the second or third year you're in the White House, you've really gotten to know everybody, you have heard all the conversation, you have found out that undersecretary has two intelligent things to say, and you heard them the first and second years you were there. And you start to think you have a new insight. And it can be boiled down to this. Oh my God, we're running things? And it is true for all people, because the White House is supposed to be the place of great excellence, If that is not an excellent place, what could be excellent in America? And of course, it's not excellent. It's full of human beings. It's silly.
What was it like being a woman in the White House in Washington politics?
It was strange. It was just strange. I mean, I was introduced the day I got my job. A really nice fellow speechwriter, a young guy, brought me around to the other speechwriters, and he introduced me saying, "This is Peggy Noonan. She has the woman's speechwriter job." Because traditionally there was sort of a White House habit that there were 6 speechwriters and only one was a woman. So naturally I wasn't hired as a speechwriter. I was hired as the woman's speechwriter. It was kind of strange, We all dressed strange. It was the early 80s. Do you remember the early 80s and women in business? We were all wearing these like little blue suits with little white shirts and like a little tie sometimes. We dressed like little guys walking down the hall.
There's one other thing I'd love you to read. Let's do Marlon Fitzwater's Bald Head.
Oh, that's
166.
a rude part.
Well, it's kind of sweet too, I think.
166?
166.
Yeah, he said something very smart. And I think Rudy Giuliani absorbed this information. By the way, for all you politically ambitious Rogaine users, Marlon Fitzwater once told me something smart about men's hairstyles. He told me his hair began thinning on top when he was a young man, and he had to decide whether to accept it or to grow his hair long on the side and sweep it over the top of his head. He concluded that if he chose the latter, a lot of people on meeting him would think, Marlon's trying to hide the fact that he's losing his hair. Whereas if he didn't do the big comb over, people would probably look at him and think, Marlon has nice eyes. So that's the route he took. And when you meet him, you think, Marlon has beautiful eyes. And then in a parentheses, the problem for people in politics with trying to cover a bald spot with that hair on the sides trick or with a toupee is this. People look at you and think, that guy's got a lie on his head. And then they think to themselves, I bet he's got other lies. So it's not a good thing to do. That's just very short and unneeded political advice for the, for the prematurely bald.
How do you think a political campaign should be run? If you were doing it and you could cut out all the nonsense and all the sort of deception, what would you do?
Oh, you wouldn't want to cut out all the nonsense and deception. You want to still have a good time, you know? What should you do? I don't know. You should...
What do you yearn for in a candidate? I mean, you speak of you went to the Democratic Convention and it occurred to you as you know, another enactment, which really it is.
Yes, yeah.
But what did you yearn to have somebody do there?
A huge enactment. Well, I don't know. I was disturbed about the recent Democratic Convention, the New York one. I covered it for Newsweek, the 1992 Democratic Convention. I mean, I found it disturbing in a lot of ways. Everybody was acting out, it seemed to me, a fantasy from their youth. There were all these reporters walking around with little things coming out of their heads, doing stand-up reports that didn't really have to be done, from the floor of the convention where nothing was happening. There were people, political peoples, in like the Louisiana delegation and the California delegation, they were huddling. You know, they were huddling the way Mayor Daley and his guys used to huddle, and Mike DeSalle and his guys used to huddle. But of course you know that what they were saying in the middle of that huddle was, do you think they have that $19.92 on thing at dinner too, or is it just lunch? They were talking about unimportant things. And Clinton, I thought, I must tell you, I just thought Clinton was doing... I had a very strong sense when I started watching Clinton that moment when he met John Kennedy and they shook hands was very important in his life. And that as very many people from troubled homes do, he had decided to become something. He had met what he was going to become. And that night when he was crowned at the Democratic Convention, he was really becoming John Kennedy. And it disturbed me for a simple reason. When John Kennedy was acting like John Kennedy, he was John Kennedy. But when Bill Clinton acts like John Kennedy, you are trapped in someone's neurosis. That's how you feel as a delegate, and that's how you feel as a reporter. So it all felt so inauthentic to me. And Republican conventions are equally inauthentic, but perhaps in some different ways. But, oh gee, that's a really big question. The most I would do to change things is I just wish some different people would go into politics in America and rise.
What kind of people?
People who read books. You know, there are wonderful columnists in America. George Will has so many opinions. Why doesn't he run for the Senate? You know? I mean, there are, he is one of many I would pick, but there are so many bright people in this country. And I wish they would start running for big office. You know? I
mean, why doesn't America have somebody in politics who can write a speech like Václav Havel? I mean, poor little Czechoslovakia, it's a tiny little country.
Yeah, but writers are sensitive, and sensitive people would not do well in the process. It's a brutalizing and inane and vicious kind of process. And I can't imagine really sensitive intellectual writer types asking the NRA for a $10,000 contribution with ease and delight, you know?
Maybe for the better.
Well, or name the liberal, a similar liberal group, you know? Mm-hmm. It's just the sensitive don't go into it because it's not where sensitive people flourish.
Well, that's probably the answer to why George Will doesn't go into it. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe.
He never struck me as timorous and sensitive, George Will. But, you know what I mean? Well. He is a TV star. So he's used to a certain amount of nonsense.
You were very enamored of what was once called family values, like Reagan. And yet Reagan came from a family whose father was alcoholic. And really, I mean, I guess you'd have to say, in common contemporary parlance, a somewhat dysfunctional household.
Totally.
Yeah, and
but so what? I mean, when Republicans speak of traditional values and say we need to pay more attention to those things, they are not saying, by the way, I came from a fully functional home. They are not saying, Mom wasn't a Valium addict. Do you know what I mean? They are saying there are values in this country that have helped make us great, and then we ought to keep our mind on them and remember them now and then. But that doesn't mean that they are claiming any kind of moral purity or background that is undisturbed. Everyone in America has a disturbed background.
But maybe...
I mean, it's one of the things that keeps us together as the happy nation we are.
Yes.
Do you know anyone who walks around and says things like, I came from a functional family? Nobody says that. Nobody thinks they did.
But I think that for many people who are, are, quote, for functional families in a kind of a ideological way, do sort of miss the ambiguity of life. I mean, the life isn't that way. That, it's one thing to talk about it. It's another. I mean, you're a single mother. Mm-hmm. And everybody has some kind of a strange...
I was asked recently if I was Dan Quayle's nightmare. I said, I don't think so.
Can I ask you how you viewed Dan Quayle?
How do I view Dan Quayle?
Or did you? I'd like to think of put it
I
in the
viewed
past
him at a
tense.
great distance. I thought that Dan Quayle, I'll tell you, if George Bush had taken Dan Quayle's political advice for the 4 years in which Bush was president, Bush would still be president. Dan Quayle had a very smart political mind. We were discussing this backstage also, and I can't remember if you were there.
No.
Dan Quayle also had the one of the traits of the secure mind. He had only brilliant people around him. He had a first-rate staff. He loved brilliant people. He thought he needed them. He had a lot of common sense.
All right. Well, may Dan Quayle.
You have such a
rest in
gentle
peace.
laugh. He just sort of quietly chuckles when he disagrees. But he was but he had wonderful people around him, whereas Bush had less wonderful people around him.
Do you think it was a wise decision, not from the perspective of tactics, but that Quayle was really the best person President Bush could have chosen?
Do I think Quayle was the best person Bush could have chosen? Why, no.
Mm-hmm. I mean, not from a tactical perspective.
No, I thought Quayle was a young guy, and he had a few years in Congress, and I think just more than one term in the Senate. I thought Quayle came from Indiana, and there was a wonderful senator from Indiana named Richard Lugar, who was a real veteran. He'd really been around. He was really smart and accomplished and experienced. And I just looked at the two of them one day, and I thought, why not Lugar? It makes no sense. So I never understood that decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, you were not alone.
Well, there you are. But we're confused for different reasons, aren't we?
Sitting at your feet, Peggy, I feel ideological illumination is imminent. Maybe we should take some questions from the floor. Would you?
Lovely, if
Great.
there are any.
All right, let's do that now. I'm going to have to repeat the questions, so try to keep them brief. She's asking what your vision of conservatism was, and what was this curious marriage between speechwriter and president like for you?
My own political impulses haven't changed all that much. I like low taxes. I hate high taxes. I like low spending. I hate high spending. My first impulses towards the government are not warm and affectionate. They are skeptical. I used to be very happily anti-communist. And I always thought that Reagan and after him Bush, but particularly Reagan, was very right and very frankly articulating his very robust opposition to communism. On foreign affairs now, my own impulses are getting worked out each day, in a way, in this more interesting, more 1914-like world in which we're living. With the world having lost its bipolar disorder, with communism having left. It is interesting to figure out. I would love to see someone articulate the great purposes of American foreign policy at this point.
The question is, what did the conservative revolution mean to you?
Oh, it was a great moment. It meant a great deal to me. I always felt like another conservative. I didn't feel like my viewpoints or impulses were very different from those of those around me. But I did come from a different place, a more working class environment. So I had certain other perceptions that some of the folks in the White House or in the conservative movement didn't have. God, it was a great time. It was a time. It was a vivid time. It was a very vivid and distinct and discrete time. But all of the 80s was, you know.
Were your goals achieved?
Gee, I am not sure my goals were greater than I wanted to work for Reagan. I liked him so much, and I wanted to help him, and the only way I could was as a writer. And that was my great goal. I found something, though, funny. Within the past year, I found an old memo that I had sent to my boss in the White House. I was brand new at the White House. I was making jokes. I was asking for a speech. I was lobbying for a speech. And then I said something like, and if you give me this speech, I'm going to give you a very warm portrait in the book I write. Now, I don't remember when I was early on in the White House fantasizing about writing a book, but that little joke was kind of significant. So I guess early on I was thinking of writing that. You know, in the book, my first book, I wanted it to be very different. I wanted it, I was very ambitious about that book. I wanted to write a classic. I wanted it to be a book no one had written before. And I wanted it to capture not only a time in our history, but also I wanted it to capture the White House and what it was like in an almost sensory way to work there.
Well, Peggy, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.
Thank you very much for a wonderful audience. It was fun.
You have been listening to Peggy Noonan with Orville Schell in a program for the Women's Foundation in San Francisco, made possible by a major grant from the Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund. Join us next time. For City Arts, this is Maya Angelou.
If you would like to order an audio cassette of this program and receive a complete list of City Arts of San Francisco audio cassettes now available, the number to call is 1-800-41-RIVER. That's 1-800-41-RIVER. City Arts of San Francisco is produced by Margaret Pick and Pacific Vista Productions in association with KQED and WFDD-FM. For City Arts and Lectures Incorporated, a Sidney Goldstein and Stephen Barclay production. City Arts of San Francisco is distributed by WFMT, the Ideas Network.